but it's an argument. And if you follow poetry, since Pope cheered for Newton through Coleridge, who decried Newton, poetry and the arts have been bouncing off the wall of science for 350 years. We seem to be told you can have Einstein or you can have Shakespeare, but you better not have them in the same room. I think that's profoundly wrong, and I'll try to persuade you that it's wrong. And there's Al right there. You might agree with me. I don't know. There's some other injuries we suffer, particularly we secular humanists. I heard it already today, sitting over on the other side of the room. We've been told that to be spiritual is either foolish or stupid or dangerous or meaningless or going to the dark side. I think that's wrong. And and I'm beginning to understand even more than having finished my book 3 weeks ago, and I'll get to it as I get further into the talk, why it's wrong. But it turns out that we have very little idea about how the biosphere will evolve, how our technologies will evolve, how civilization will evolve. I'm not sure about the abiotic universe. It's going to turn out because of that, I will argue, and the most radical thing I'm going to say, but there's no actual natural law that describes much of the evolution of the biosphere, of technology, of civilization. Therefore, I'm going to try to tell you, we do in fact live into the unknown. We really do. And it's not part of our scientific worldview yet, but I think it's going to become part of it. And therefore, we need something to orient ourselves as we live into what the theologians call mystery, without being mystical at all. It's absolutely real, and I'll try to show you that. Okay, so let's now turn to reductionism. Most scientists half a century ago were complete reductionists. It's now becoming doubted by very good scientists. But first, what is it? So Newton's laws, at about the time of Napoleon, Simon Pierre Laplace said, if you tell me the positions and velocities of all the particles in the universe the same instant, that I can use Newton's laws, and a vast intelligence could compute the entire future, and since Newton's laws are time reversible, the entire past of the universe. That's the simplest statement of reductionism. In it there are the following things, some of which have lapsed from current physics and some of which haven't. First of all, it's deterministic. Newton's laws are deterministic. Whatever is uniquely determines what will happen next. Quantum mechanics throws that out, but it's certainly there in Newton. And the other is, there are two other features of this that are really deeply important. One is what I will call the nothing but view. It is that everything else in the universe, us sitting in this room having this conversation, is nothing but particles in motion, whatever's down there. It could be particles, it could be quarks and gluons, it could be strings, whatever is down there in physics now. That this is held by major physicists is seen by reading Steven Weinberg, who says in one of his two books, I keep getting the two confused, it's either The First 3 Seconds or Dreams of a Final Theory. He said, I think Dreams of a Final Theory, he says all the explanatory arrows point downward. They point from societies to people, to organs, to cells, to biochemistry, to chemistry, to physics, to fundamental physics, namely the Standard Model and general relativity. He admits that it's hard to deduce upward. So that's maybe a modern statement of reductionism. And he goes on to say something else. He says, you know, the more we know of the universe, the more meaningless it seems. Okay, so there's reductionism. Major physicists, Nobel quality physicists, are coming to doubt it. So it's now a matter of contention among very good physicists. I don't know where the split is now. I know 3 Nobel laureate physicists who are firm reductionists, and I know 3 Nobel laureate physicists who are firm anti-reductionists. So in a sample of 6, it's 50-50. I don't know what the wider world is, but it's shifting. So the first is a Nobel laureate named Phil Anderson, who is furious at me for writing this book. He's a wonderful man. He thinks I'm going to the dark side. I'm not. And I love him. Okay. Phil wrote an article in 1972 called More is Different, in which he argued against reductionism. He was the first to come out. He was the first brave enough to say there's something wrong with this. And he talked about one main thing in that article, and since then has talked about something else that I'll tell you. If you take a molecule of methane, it's a nitrogen attached to, I guess it's a nitrogen, attached to 3 carbon. CH4, thanks. Carbon attached to 3 hydrogens. And Anderson noticed that if you put the 3 hydrogens down on the table, the carbon could be above it or below the table. And he said, gee, that breaks the space symmetry. What's going on? And then he calculated the quantum tunneling between the upstate and the downstate and found that it flipped back and forth zillions of times a second. He said, so who cares? Okay. Then he said, but wait a minute, what if you take a sugar molecule, plain old sugar? It can be left-handed or right-handed, and the transition by quantum tunneling between left-handed and right-handed is longer than the lifetime of the universe. So he says more is different. Whether a molecule be left-handed or right-handed, or a mixture be what's called racemic, a symmetry has been broken. That's not in the fundamental laws of physics. So a simple example is I take a pole, put it up in the room. It has the full rotational symmetry of the room, or the floor, 360 degrees. It falls over and it now points in a specific direction. The symmetry has been broken. So physics is full of broken symmetries, of which the sugar molecule is an example. And says Anderson, that's emergent. He gives another example. Says, and this is in a conversation, I don't think it's in this article. He says, look, suppose you have something that's a computer that's computing the square root of 2. You could do that on your home computer if you do the algorithm, which I don't. But you could also make the computer out of Tinker Toys. You could make the computer out of water bowls with a level of water in the bowl, and above it's 1 and below it's 0. And you can make the water bowls pour water into one another and compute the square root of 2. And we're now upon what the philosophers call a multiple platform argument. Anderson's point is that indefinitely many physical systems could manage to compute the square root of 2. Therefore, you cannot reduce the statement computing the square root of 2 to any particular physical platform. I'm going to tell you what reducing is in a moment. But it's indefinite with respect to the stuff that's doing the computing. So he wants to say that's emergent too. It doesn't depend upon the underlying physics. It could be a whole variety, an indefinite variety of underlying physics, and we'd still manage